speakeasies in the 20s and 30s where marijuana had been introduced to the African American community. Turn the music down? How about it? Thank you, Tyler. Again, marijuana was introduced to the African American community in New Orleans via the slave trade, unfortunately, and it migrated, the jazz sounds migrated up the East Coast into Harlem, and speakeasies were spaces in the 20s and 30s where folks could smoke their weed, use their marijuana, and all the names, Gage from Louis Armstrong, where we have these great quotes that improved their music. They'd mess up their minds like alcohol, and most importantly, these were spaces where folks could hang out without fear of prejudice and come together. And again, we have the history of American jazz because of these spaces. So I borrowed that name for this. And again, so our focus is social justice and ensuring social justice happens in the cannabis industry. So thank you again for everybody being a change maker. And so our focus at every TPAD, well, supposed to have a live jazz band. We had a little snafu that week, but I have my TPAD playlist here. So unfortunately, a last minute change with the band. Some important things to speak about prior to Corey Barnett, our keynote speaker, is going to be up in a second. But per the ACL, we've got some data that African Americans are roughly 4 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana. As we know, as I referenced in Maryland, unfortunately, the industry in Maryland and certainly across the country is not representative of folks that should be, and owners and entrepreneurs and part of the workforce in the industry. So we're here to make a difference. So a bit about Corey. Don't remember how we met, but we've had some really great conversations. I did stalk him. Probably. Yeah, probably. So Corey's been part of the cannabis industry actually very early on in the legal industry since in 2008, where he went to California and got his start. And dove deep. He has, in San Diego, he has worked with state legislators and industry owners and operators around the country. He is representative of less than 1% of all licensed cannabis companies are owned by African Americans. Corey owns 2 licenses here in DC, a grow and a dispensary. And he's worked with folks in Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, California, Louisiana, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, and others. Nice. Corey, with his work and relentless focus, is helping to shape things in the industry and to make sure that we have fair laws and regulations operating for our businesses and to ensure their success. Corey shares his company mission, which is focused on highest quality brands and highest quality facilities that he is ensuring that the medicine comes from within the industry. Corey's focus, again, shares that of TPAD, is that we are here with a focus on social justice and education. So Corey's going to speak, and then I'll hand him the mic, and then we'll open.
Obviously, it's a pleasure to be here, and Jackie really does deserve another huge round of applause for having this kind of discussion. It's critical, it's essential, it's necessary, and I do that. Increasing diversity in the cannabis industry. It seems like an easy conversation to have, but it's really not. And so, as we get started and as we kind of go down this path, I want to take the time to have a truly fruitful and a value-added conversation. And in order to do that, I have to be able to speak openly. I have to be able to speak without fear. And so I want to say now that my comments are not meant in any way, shape, or form to inflame or enrage. But more so, my comments are meant to provoke thought and to engage you and challenge the way that we are approaching diversity in the industry, challenge the way that we are thinking about diversity in the industry in an effort to try and make us a more inclusive industry and try to make us a better industry. So to that end, I will likely say something at some point in time during my discussion here that will rub almost everyone in the room the wrong way. But I ask that you blame my head and not my heart. Diversity. I happen to believe, with a growing group of people, that the term is being used inappropriately relative to what it is we actually mean. I say that because since 1971, when Nixon stepped out and declared a war on drugs, there has been a very significant relationship between the government and Black people and Latinos. Okay. And when we talk about the absence of diversity in our industry, we're really only talking about a subset of what truly makes our industry diverse. The use of the term diversity, in my opinion, is sugarcoating the fact that we're really talking about Blacks and Latinos. And if we're actually going to be able to make change in our industry, we have to address the fact that we are talking about Blacks and Latinos head on. We don't do that effectively in our industry. We have to do a better job at that in our industry. We use phrases like communities hit hardest by the war on drugs. And what we're really meaning is the residents of those communities, which typically were Blacks and Latinos, being hit hardest by the war on drugs. So throughout the conversation that I plan to have with you tonight, I plan to use the term Blacks and Latinos.
Thank you.
It might sound uncomfortable. It's meant to be uncomfortable because I'm here to talk about the problem. And we can't address the problem if we are unwilling to use the terms that define the problem at hand.
Right.
Blacks and Latinos have been victims of a culture of criminalization where they comprise the overwhelming majority of what today has become approximately 1.6 million people a year that are arrested, persecuted, or subjected to supervision under the criminal justice system. Our communities have been depressed, have undergone depressed economies, widespread cyclical poverty, generations of destroyed family systems, commercialized prison labor, billions in civil asset forfeiture, stigmatization of children because their parents have been incarcerated, massive amounts of fees paid to defend ourselves and our loved ones in the criminal justice system, demonization and disenfranchisement of minority communities leading to underfunded and ignored infrastructure, underfunded schools and social programs, minimized voting power due to being caught up with felony convictions, inability to serve on juries, a lack of access to employment, a lack of access to programs designed to promote a pathway to the middle class, Pell Grants, lack of access to government-backed student loans, aggressive policing. I can do this for hours.
Facts.
The point being made is that there's a significant price that has been paid by a specific group of people. And so it should not be unreasonable that as we move to sort of legalize the main weapon, right? Nothing has been used more than marijuana to incarcerate us over the last 50 years, 49 years, right? 49 years since 1971. And as we look to make this industry legal, I would argue that if we're not being liberally disingenuous, where we should start is with the people we harm the most and the people we harmed first. That's just me being honest. phrase itself, increasing diversity in the cannabis industry. Increasing diversity in the cannabis industry. I have a problem with that. I'm going to say it as clear as I possibly can. I have a problem with that. I believe that the phrase itself is disingenuous. It implies that minorities are not in the cannabis industry to begin with. Since cannabis entered the country, blacks and Latinos have played a role and had a relationship with the plant. It is the fact that we are making rules to shut them out of the industry that is causing the problem today. You don't have to go much further than your plug, your hookup, your person to find a very active community of great product makers, great would-be operators and owners, provided they had the access to licensing. The problem is not blacks and Latinos accessing the industry. The problem is the industry licensing black and Latino existing operators.
Right.
And so I can't help but to ask myself, why do we say it that way? Like, what is it we're trying to do when we use terms like diversity, communities hit hardest by the war on drugs, and increasing diversity in the cannabis industry just generally? It feels to me like what we're trying to do is avoid conflict. We don't want to go to our state legislators and say it like it is. But there's a problem with that. And I would argue that that problem is why we're all in the room today. When we go to our state legislators and we say things like, I want you to increase diversity, they go back and they write rules that increase diversity. Those rules don't always get blacks and Latinos into the room. We have to be willing to stand up to our legislators and use the kind of terms that make the kind of change that we want, right? We have to be able to speak to authority with an open heart and with honesty, and then demand of our legislators, demand of our regulators, demand of our assigns what we need in order to be able to feel like we got the outcome we wanted. The industry itself is plagued with that little small nuance, right? Why don't they write the laws in a way that's inclusive? Like, why is that? Anybody? I mean, like, why is it? I mean, like, I refuse to believe that it's just cold, hard racism. I refuse to believe that. Right? I believe differently. My data suggests that there is no massive boogeyman that's out there trying to harm you solely because you're black. But I would argue that, and I want to speak just briefly about Washington, D.C., right? In Washington, D.C., we don't have a social equity program. But in Washington, D.C., we do have the majority of dispensaries being owned by black people. In Washington, D.C., you can find African Americans working at every level of the employment chain. In Washington, D.C., we went to our legislators and our regulators, and we sat down and we told them what we wanted. Our legislators, our regulators, actually stopped and said, no one has said it that way before. No one has told us, because when they first gave away licenses in Washington, D.C., they gave away 3 grow licenses. I happened to win one. A year and a half later, we had 3 dispensaries We had 3 grow licenses. I owned 1 dispensary. I owned 1 grow. I sat in front of the city council committee on health, and I expressed to them my disenchantment with how the industry was forming. Because at that time, everyone who worked in the industry that was black or a woman that was not related to the owner worked for me. And I said, this is Washington, D.C. This is what's going on all over the city for the last 5 decades. This is unacceptable. And I was able to get council members, I was able to get our mayor, I was able to get people to step up and promise to make a change. And so I would push back on the notion that there is a boogeyman or a group of evildoers out there sitting back plotting your demise. I would actually argue that it's something deeper than that. I would actually argue that it's something hidden beneath the surface of matters. It's much harder to detect than the outright biases that show themselves when we experience racism or capitalism or greed or cronyism. It's something that seems almost structured and it seems almost methodical, right? It might have been born initially out of those things, but it's lived so long in our country's way of thinking and our way of doing things that we just accept it as the status quo. How do we license? Our governments, both locally, at the county level, the state level, and at the federal level, are completely comfortable sitting back and deciding who gets what, when they get it, how they get it, why they get it, how much of it they get. It is almost intrinsic in our government to lean towards the wealthy, the privileged, those with access, those that have relationships with them, lobbyists, and the whole 9. They do it without even thinking about it. And it's not until someone actually alarms them, it's not until someone actually goes to them and says, this is what you're doing, that they wake up. I've seen it happen in Oakland. I've seen it happen in Los Angeles. I saw it happen here in Washington, D.C. I'm hoping that it will happen in the state of Maryland. I'm hoping that it will happen in New Jersey. I'm fighting to make it happen in Massachusetts right now. I'm fighting to make it happen in New York right now. And when we're able to sit back and have this open kind of conversation and talk to people about the harms that have been done, the fact that these entrepreneurs already exist, we can actually open doors. But for whatever reason, we as an industry are oftentimes reluctant to do it. I don't understand why. I don't understand what we have to lose. I, for one, don't like the phrase social equity program. I believe that black people in this country and Latinos in this country have paid a price that is so massive that you can rightfully step up on the stage right here, right now, and say, nah, this one is mine. You get a piece. I can't find one place in the country where the results of a social equity program have achieved what I would call parity, given what the costs we've actually paid in the war on drugs. And so the last thing I would challenge us to do is to get our rhetoric right. Mm-hmm. Understand what you paid, understand what's yours, understand what you should be able to willfully ask for and demand. And then don't leave until you get it. And so we say, all right, well, all that's, great pie in the sky, Corey. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. How do we do that? Well, I've actually already told you 3 things. One, we get our rhetoric right. We look at our legislators, what our problem is, the way our problem is. We don't sugarcoat it. We don't wrap it in a nice, acceptable bow or bun. And we shouldn't really give a damn if they like what we say or not. We vote. We're the people. The second thing that we have to do is that we have to get in the room. If we are not there when the rules are written, for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 years, we will be fighting to change the laws to undo the damage that was previously done.
Right.
If you're not in the room, you're out of the deal. And it's really just that simple. If rules are being written and we are not at the table, we are being undone. Stop trusting that the government and that regulators and that legislators will get it right for you. Get in the room, do whatever it takes to get in the room, and get it right for yourself. The last thing that we have to do is that we have to be willing to stand up. And I'm glad I'm by the door right now because this is probably where y'all gonna start throwing stuff at me. We have to be willing to stand up. We have to. Because there's a lot of things that kind of go on that we know is wrong, and we're hurting ourselves because of it. Right? There are social equity programs popping up all over the place. Inside of every social equity program is a bunch of licenses that are simply straw men. These social equity programs are designed to create jobs for blacks and Latinos, wealth for blacks and Latinos, opportunities to partner with businesses that are not in the cannabis industry but are owned by blacks and Latinos. And when you allow yourself to be utilized as a straw man by a group of people who are not blacks and Latinos, you are doing nothing but selling out. And we should be willing to call that out each and every time we see it. Because every time we look the other way, that's about 50 brothers and sisters that are not going to get trained. That's about $500,000 to $1 million to maybe even tens of millions of dollars that are not going to trade with other businesses that are owned by people that look like you and me. And if you don't think that that has an impact, you're wrong. You're wrong. Shonda Messias owns National Holistic Healing here in Washington, D.C. Great business. When Shonda Messias opened her doors, she and Michael called me and they said, hey man, we need you to come down here. They sounded a little stressed, sounded a little upset, sounded a little shook. So I hopped in my car. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Is there a problem? They said, why is it that no one will sell to us? I said, let's run it by me again. They said, yeah, we've called every grower in the district except you, and no one will sell to us. I said, well, the first problem is that you didn't call me. Right? But the second problem is that you actually walked in thinking that your ice was just as cold. The reality is that time and time again, we see people who get awarded licenses that can't get premium supply relationships. They can't get relationships with service providers. They get overcharged by their service providers. Their partnership agreements are not as favorable. If we are not in the industry able to compete effectively, then the industry will march over us and take back what gains we've made. Today, Shonda Messias has the largest dispensary in Washington, D.C. I don't mind saying that because I happen to have the second largest. So it's all good. But she her story is a story that I've heard dozens and dozens of times around the country. And this is not about doing business at the exclusion of other ethnic groups, other minorities, or other people that have served to make our industry wonderful and diverse. This is about being able to sit at the table at parity, engage in business the way that we want to engage in business, help make the entire industry stronger, and be better, and live our dreams just like everyone else does. That's what I wanted to come here tonight to say to you. Hopefully I didn't talk too long. And if there are any questions, I'll happily duck and let Jackie take them on.